Welcome to Awaken Church Spark Notes. My name is Stephen Freeman, one of the deacons here, and this past Sunday I got to preach our final service of 2021. Right before everybody breaks for the holidays and heads off to Faith Walkers. A lot of folks are headed there. The topic that I wanted to talk about was silence and solitude, which is considered a spiritual discipline. But it's one that we tend to neglect a lot, especially with the pace of life. We tend to run really fast and just kind of believe this lie that life is going to slow down. I'll get a break in a little bit, or I'll be able to have some breathing room here in a minute. But in reality, what is sacrificed with that lie is all of these little middle moments, these liminal spaces. And liminal is one of my favorite words, and there's some of my favorite times too. It's the space between two things. So it comes from the Latin word for threshold, which is that space in your house that's between two rooms. So it's that in-between moment. And in these liminal spaces, we naturally do things like reflect on the past and look forward to the future. And so this really unique week between Christmas and New Year's is a time for that kind of reflection. And so it's into that liminal space that I want to basically make my best pitch for the spiritual disciplines of silence and solitude, which I think get neglected a decent amount. Basically, I'm making three claims that kind of stack on top of each other. The first one is that just at a fundamental level, hearing God's voice is a good thing. Hearing God's voice is a good thing. And not only is it a good thing, it's actually the loudest voice we should be listening to. Over voices of comfort, over voices of finances, over voices of information, over voices of anything else that speaks into our world. Because I think a lot of times Christians, we buy into this idea that, yes, I believe that hearing God's voice is a good thing, but then we make decisions based off of a lot of other voices without actually taking the time to hear from God on that. So hearing God's voice is a good thing. It's kind of establishment number one. And then two is that God very often speaks, and how he chooses to speak is in these moments of quiet and solitude and isolation and loneliness, and just these still moments within our busy life. Those are the times he's inviting us into. Granted, he can and sometimes does knock someone like the Apostle Paul off his horse and say, Paul, why are you persecuting me? But for the most part, he is inviting us into this quiet time and this quiet moment to be still, to know that he's God, to commune with him, to listen, to pray, and to just spend time with him. And one thing that God really challenged me with was he told me that, Stephen, when you avoid that quiet place, when you avoid the space where I've called you to, where I want to meet you, it's the same thing as avoiding me. If you avoid the spot where I want to meet you, that's avoiding me. And the reality is that most of the time it's not that I can't hear God's voice, it's that I avoid the space where he wants to speak to me, because there's a little part of me that kind of knows what he wants to talk about and doesn't really want him to talk about it. There's this kind of feeling in the Christian world that it makes a lot of sense to say, hearing God's voice is hard, and it's a difficult thing, or I struggle with hearing God's voice. It feels comfortable to stay in that gear because there's less guilt in that gear. It's a much different thing to say, I'm actively avoiding spending time with God because he's spoken and I don't want to obey him, which is a very different thing, but it's very frequently the reality in our lives. So, but God frequently invites us into these quiet moments to speak to us. And the third one is that we are not often quiet. About 96 times a day, we're checking our phones. We get about between 40 and 60 notifications from our phones. Even when it is quiet, our internal thought life is so sporadic and it moves so quickly, it's hard to actually sit and listen and wait. And so one of my challenges for y'all is to think of yourself as shepherding your thoughts. It's easy to say my thoughts, I lost my train of thought, or I got distracted. When in reality, it's like you're a shepherd and you have this flock of sheep and one runs off and then you just go follow it. When in reality, it's our job to bring it back and then bring it to submission and say, God, is this what you want to talk about? This is the thing you want to talk about, or no? Okay, so you're in control of your thoughts. So if this is a discipline that you want to start putting into practice, I'll give you some practicals. First one is just make use of the time that you've already got. You've got commutes. You've got time in the car. You show up to meetings a little bit early. Leverage those times for intentional moments of quiet. Another one is going to be pay attention to the thing you use as a coping mechanism to avoid that feeling of discomfort. And then three is remember that silence and solitude is not only what God's invited us into to spend time with him, but it's also an act of worship. You know, we talk about praise, we talk about music as well, worship is more than just singing. This is one of those things that it is more than. That spending time in silence and waiting on the Lord can be an act of worship as well. So, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. For those of you who are traveling to Faith Walkers, please travel safe, and we'll see you all in 2022.